Hi everybody, thanks for joining me here for this lesson on rating errors in performance evaluations. We're going to talk about 4 different types of rating errors. The first one that we're going to look at is called similarity to the rater. Okay, now in this situation, I want to imagine that I am giving performance evaluations to a group of employees. And as many of you may know, I am a proud RPI graduate. So let's say I have 5 employees that I have to give performance evaluation ratings to. And these employees come from Rochester Institute of Technology, University of Vermont, Clarkson University, Syracuse, and there's one from RPI. Now, there's a possibility that I'm going to look at this employee from RPI and I'm going to see some similarity between me and this individual because we do come from the same university. And I'm going to say, hey, this person's like me. Let's go red. And they're going to get a little bit of a more favorable evaluation maybe than what they deserve and a little bit of a more favorable evaluation than their peers. Now, it's not necessarily against the law for this similarity to rater bias to occur, but I want to think through how these types of things can manifest within organizations for a minute so we can understand some of the challenges that we deal with here. Often when there is a similarity to rater bias taking place and this error is occurring, we'll hear people make statements such as, I see a little bit of myself in him. Now, typically when I do lectures and videos and things of that nature, I tend to be very careful not to use gendered language. But in this case, you saw that I did use gendered language in the pronoun that I selected, and I did that on purpose. And the reason is, sometimes when there is a similarity to rater bias, it can be rooted in sex, race, age, or other protected classes. And when this occurs, then we have the potential to have illegal discrimination taking place, and the organization can be put at risk. So we want to be very careful to control any ratings errors that are caused by similarity to the rater. Next, we're going to move on to contrast errors. And contrast errors deal with when we evaluate our employees based upon the performance of others as opposed to evaluating them based upon their own performance. So in this situation, I want you to imagine that we have a group of salespeople, and there's 9 salespeople up here on the screen, and we have one of them who has exceeded their goal for the year. They actually performed at 115% of their goal, which typically we would look at and we would consider that to be very good. But in this case, most of our salespeople perform very well. We see that all but one of them exceeded 100% of their goal, and some of them performed as high as 185% of their goal. Now, in this case, the person who performed at 115% of their goal may actually be rated pretty poorly, not because we're evaluating them based upon their sales, but because we're evaluating them based upon how everybody else performed. Now, there are some cases where everyone within an organization may be performing at a high level because of environmental factors, and those environmental factors get taken into consideration in performance evaluations. That would not necessarily be a contrast error. But if we were to simply discount the performance of the individual who had performed at 115% of their goal solely because everybody else performed well, that would be an example of a contrast error. So we're going to move forward on to distribution errors. And distribution errors occur when raters don't evaluate using their broad scale, but instead they tend to evaluate everybody pretty much the same way using one section of the evaluation. So the first type of distribution error that we're going to take a look at is called a strictness error. Now, there are managers who take great pride in evaluating their employees very difficultly and not giving out a lot of high evaluation scores. And often they may have a lot of their scores on evaluations ranging in that 1 to 2 area. That would be an example of a distribution error due to strictness. Now, on the other side of things, we have managers who like to rate their employees very highly. They feel all their people do a good job. They want to improve motivation and morale by giving out good reviews, and they tend to rate strictly using 4s and 5s on a scale of 1 to 5. That would be an example of a distribution error due to leniency. And then we have people who tend to rate more in the middle with a lot of 3s and then some 2s and 4s here and there. That would be a distribution error due to central tendency. Now, distribution errors can bring up a couple problems within our organizations. Okay, the first one we want to think about is when all employees are evaluated by the same person. The result that we can have come out of that is that top performers are not compensated fairly. The reason for this is that if all the employees are evaluated in the same area, the top performers are not differentiated through their performance evaluations. Then, if we issue bonuses or merit pay increases, our top performers don't benefit from their performance because their evaluations indicate that they're very similar to their peers. The other issue that can occur is that when all employees are evaluated by different people, there can be inequities in compensation. And this happens because if you have one group of people that is evaluated by a manager who errs on the lenient side of leniency, and another one where there is a strictness distribution error, the people who are rated higher may not be rated higher because they're performing better. They just may be rated higher because their manager was biased upwards, whereas the other manager was biased downwards. Now, again, if we have bonuses or merit pay that is determined by these performance evaluations, there are going to be differences in compensation based upon these ratings, but there are actually going to be inequitable differences because the cause of the ratings was not the employee's performance, it was the bias of the manager. Finally, we're going to wrap up here talking about the halo and horns effect. Now, for the halo and horns effect, I'm going to illustrate this using an example. We're going to imagine we have a salesperson here who is a very high performer, and we really enjoy having this salesperson who's a high performer, and they kind of develop a little bit of a halo over their head where we see them as a very, very good person within the organization. Now, when we're evaluating them on things other than sales, it's quite possible that halo grows a little bit. And as we evaluate them on things like operations and processes and job knowledge, those things fall within that halo created by sales, and we evaluate them well, even if they're not performing well in those areas. This can happen with negative areas as well. If we have a person who's not very good at sales, and we're evaluating their sales, they develop kind of a little bit of a horns effect here. And what we see is the horns on the person's head indicating that there's negative sales. And as we evaluate them on different areas, those horns kind of grow and encompass those different areas. And as we evaluate their job knowledge and their organizational citizenship behavior and their use of processes within the organization, their performance in those areas gets discounted because of their poor sales performance. Now, there are a few key takeaways I want you to take from the halo and horns effects here. The first is with the halo effect, performance deficiencies are not addressed because we tend to evaluate people favorably based upon one strong characteristic, so their areas that are not so strong never get addressed in the evaluation process. With the horns effect, performance credit isn't given where it's due, because where an employee is performing well, they're being discounted due to poor performance in another area. The other thing that I want to make sure you're aware of here is that the halo and horns effect are sometimes simply referred to as the halo effect. So there are times where you may hear someone talk about a halo effect, but they are referring to negative performance. As we wrap up here, it's obviously very important to think about, okay, how do we reduce these ratings errors as we're giving performance evaluations? And there are trainings that people can go through and they can be very helpful, but incorporating objective data into the performance evaluation process is the most effective way to reduce rating errors. So if you do have ways that you can incorporate objective performance data into that process, that is going to make the biggest impact and help you avoid making these attribution errors that impact people's performance ratings. I thank you for joining me for this lesson here. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll talk to you soon.